Good morning. My name is Scott Bradley. I manage or help lead government and corporate affairs for BDO and Lixar, based here in Ottawa. And before we start, I should say BDO and we've got quite a large practice across the country, and this is Indigenous History Month. And one thing that we are starting to do now as an organization is acknowledge the land in terms of where we operate, and in my case, based here in Ottawa, which is the unceded territory of the Algonquin and Anishinaabe people. So one of the things that we're trying to do as an organization certainly is to recognize where we do operate, and so in this case, here in Ottawa is the unceded territory of the Anishinaabe Algonquin peoples, and we'd like to acknowledge that as we start our event today in Indigenous History Month. We've got a great session to take through the morning. It is June 29th. So first of all, we want to thank everybody for joining and participating in this event. We recognize when we were starting to organize things, we know it's getting late in the summer or late in the June season before we get into summer holidays. We were hoping to do this before, in fact, summer started. And so do appreciate, we are hoping for warm weather. Kind of the type of a day that was almost super hot that you'd be better off in your home office and air conditioning. And I think we've lucked out with that. Certainly here in Ontario, I know out west it's smoking hot as well. And I see the forecast in Halifax. We have a couple of people today from Halifax on the call as well. I know it's pretty warm there also. So I think we've lucked out at least with the muggy day to make this option a nice one for folks as you go through the morning. So thank you for joining. We have four presenters, both from Lixar and from Microsoft, on with us today. And just a little bit of an introduction, if people aren't familiar with Lixar or BDO or Microsoft, we thought we'd do a quick introduction in terms of a bit of who we are and our path. Lixar has been operating both in Ottawa and in fact, we've got offices across the country, a large office in Ottawa, or a large office in Halifax as well, and have really one of Canada's leading data and AI companies, and been in the space now for about a decade. We've as part of sort of Lixar's growth, we partnered last year. In fact, we're acquired last year by BDO, and BDO Canada is a 100-year-old, traditionally been an accounting firm, but BDO has certainly made a big shift in terms of what BDO does in an organization. We've also acquired in the last 6 months a company called Simplicity BI based in Calgary. So BDO Digital now across the country has about 500 people working for it, including the Lixar team leading our data and AI practice across Canada. So it's very much for us recognizing the shift in advisory services and technology and where things are headed. It's being able to bring our organizations together is allowing us to serve our clients nationally and really look at how best we can support and equip you in sort of your journeys as organizations. So in terms of introducing our team today, we've got Susan Odell online. Susan is Lixar's Chief Operations Officer. Good morning, Susan. Susan's going to be talking a little bit about cloud. Susan's based here in Ottawa and really recognized technology leader in the Ottawa tech space. Great to have Susan on board with Lixar and joining the team, and certainly she's helping to lead really a big part of the journey that the combined organization is now taking. Jim Provo is our senior data scientist with Lixar. Jim has really been the data and AI visionary. It'll be obvious once Jim gets talking in terms of how his mind works, but a ton of fun to listen to. Has done over the last number of years, worked quite closely with several Government of Canada clients and advising them on their data journeys, and really been a visionary for us and for our clients across Canada and here in Ottawa as well. You can see Scott Nichols on the call. Scott's also based in Ottawa. Scott's with Microsoft. I don't need to introduce Microsoft, obviously, but Scott's someone that we've worked with. Scott heads up for Microsoft, one of their key public sector champions here in Ottawa, and is doing a lot of Microsoft's leadership work in terms of building those partnerships and relationships within the Government of Canada in data and AI. And I don't think we have Mike Bulmer on the call yet, but Mike is an 18-year Microsoft veteran. Mike's based in Toronto. He'll be speaking at some point on the call this morning as well. So that's really the team that's going to be doing our presenting today. And I do know from previous sessions what really makes these things go well is when people are asking questions, getting into dialogue, figuring if Jim's going down a path, don't be afraid to interrupt them, or you either use the chat function and ask questions, or if you do have a question and want to interject, please feel free to do so. We certainly feel that as the more interactive these sessions become, the more helpful they are. We've got a lot of content to cover over the course of the morning, but the goal really here is to provide some picture to you in terms of what you're looking at doing and how you get there. And so the more that we can better understand what your goals are, and be able to respond to your questions immediately, I think obviously the more value it will be for you over the course of the session. So do want to say thank you for participating. We know it's June 29th, and do appreciate the fact that you're on with us this morning. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Jim to start, and then we can get into things from there. So thank you very much. Have a great day.
Thank you, Scott. Really appreciate that. And to everyone who's joined the call today, thank you and a hearty good morning. I want to stress the same comments that Scott did around who we are and why we're here today, and certainly on the unceded territory that we're on. We're going to start today's presentation with, I think, the slogan of 2021, "Can you see my screen?" I presume you can, and if so, what we're going to do is pass this off first to the wonderful Scott Nichols to start our presentation talking about Microsoft. Scott?
Awesome, thanks, Jim. I do have to go off camera, and I hate doing that during these presentations, but just since I've been on, I've noticed that it's been lagging, so I'm going to go off just to not have an issue. And if you do notice that my voice is not coming through properly, just let me know, okay? I do apologize for that. Let's get into it. I love starting with this slide, and Scott Bradley mentioned at the top of the call, I don't think Microsoft needs an introduction, but I do love to share with our Canadian customers, and I'm Canadian and based here in Ottawa, the impact that we have within the Canadian economy and the higher education space, and also point out a couple of really cool facts. If these ever are Jeopardy questions, you'll be well equipped after this, after we go through this content. Microsoft was actually established here in Canada in 1985, so really early in our company's history, we were investing in Canada. That investment has taken on many forms. A couple that I'm particularly proud of is our partnership with higher education, and that includes high school level students as well, providing them with access to great software to start, creating that second wave, or that wave of AI leaders of the future, right? And giving students access to programs to learn how to create models in R, do machine learning, look at AI. And the reason we do that is because we've made investments locally in AI research labs, both in Montreal and in Vancouver, to develop a lot of the AI technology that you're going to hear us talk about today. So, it's somewhat of a homegrown solution. These are Canadian made products that are going through Microsoft's obviously enormous scale, being championed across the world, both in public sector and beyond. But it really all starts here in Canada, locally to the government of Canada, which is my primary customer. We have a huge partnership that spans all of our clouds, whether it's our Modern Workplace and Teams group or down into the AI and analytics space. We have great reference customers that we would love to connect you with, and Lixar is a huge part of that as well. And we've done a lot of really exciting things together. And of course, we've seen a huge uptick and shift towards more AI and ML led projects as that technology becomes, more, I would say, pervasive in the way strategies are being planned out at different government organizations, right? I'll share a small story. Just the other day, I was listening to the City of Ottawa subcommittee meeting. Yes, I do have a life, but I was asked to listen to that. And it was very fascinating, even at the council level, not just their interest in AI and ML, which I think is pretty pervasive. Everybody sort of heard of those terms and has some interest in it, but their depth of understanding at the council level, which is far removed from the IT space. And I think it really talks to this transformation. It really talks to how AI and ML is becoming ubiquitous in our society, right? People expect that there'll be some component of those capabilities built into the way that they interact with their government. So let's talk a little bit more about that. Jim, I'll just get you to go to the next slide. Perfect, thank you. This is a simplified view of what we refer to at Microsoft as the digital government maturity curve. You'll notice that there's 4 buckets ranging from analog government into intelligent government, and I'm going to get into what that means. A couple key themes that I want to point out before I dive into the deeper content. this is not just about the technology, right? You see at the bottom, we have technology and data. That's a core component. And I do find that most customers have a lot of focus when they're interacting with companies like Microsoft on the technology. But it's really more about the people and culture and creating good governance that allows you to move up this maturity curve. And it's not a linear move, right? Different parts of your organization may be at different places, while others are stuck in analog. Some may be powering ahead to the intelligent government space. So we're really looking at how holistically across organizations we can promote, not driving everything to that intelligent government space all in one motion, but get you there over time in a way that's measured and makes sense for your departmental mandate. But again, going back to my earlier comment, it's people and culture. That's the hardest thing to evolve as part of these programs. But it is becoming easier because I think it's recognized within government that citizens and employees of government expect to receive similar service levels to the way they interact with their banking organization or how they do transactions at Walmart or you name it, right? Parts of our daily life are being touched by technology. So they want the same experience when they go into the office or when you're renewing your passport or, when you're applying for something online through a government agency, filing your taxes. So let's get into a bit of the meat of what these stages mean. And I would ask you while we're going through this to think to yourself, where am I? Where is my organization in this roadmap that I'm about to lay out? And where do we want to go? And do we see other groups within our department or peer groups, whether it's at a different level of government, municipal, provincial, or federal? Do we see them achieving something that we would like to replicate? And let's use that as a way to start talking about how we can help you get there. And let's keep in mind, again, that it's not just a technology discussion. And I'll put a plug in for my friends here at Lixar BDO. They have expertise beyond the technology. They can really help you from creating a culture that adopts new technology and the governance structures and baseline table stakes that need to be in place to get you there. So, it's a holistic discussion that's much broader. Okay, so let's look at the phases and I'll give you some characteristics of each. So in the analog phase, this is very common for most parts of government. This is where your processes rely heavily on paper and physical environments for delivery. For example, having to do going to a government office to renew a driver's license. It's a really tangible example. Nobody wants to do that. In many cases, during the COVID response phase, we have seen governments work quickly to find ways of moving away from traditional requirements and overcoming these hurdles, right? It was a catalyst for change. You no longer could have people coming to renew their license. What were you going to do? While governments are in an analog phase, their ability to adapt processes and services to meet people's needs are limited. This leads to dissatisfaction in service quality and a lack of efficiency in operations, right? And I think for years, this was many organizations in government were stuck in this analog phase in whole or in part, and COVID-19 was a huge catalyst for change. A lot of programs were no longer nice to haves. They were absolute mandatories to continue operations. And many of the services that were being provided in an analog fashion are critical to the way our society functions, right? You can't have driver's licenses that aren't being renewed. You can't have passports expiring en masse. You can't have challenges renewing your health card online. So, it became an absolute imperative that these things shift. The next phase is the transactional phase, where we see government starting to make public-facing services available online, but in a way that is digitizing rather than digital. And what that means is they've taken the old process and they've made it available electronically, but they haven't used technology to change the transactional nature of the way people are engaging in the services. And that's a really important distinction. We see a lot of organizations in government taking old business processes, making them digital, and checking the box that they now have something that's digitized and they're complying with their digital government mandate. Think about taking that a step beyond and looking at how you can use technology as a way to change business processes and improve the service delivery. So not just digitizing it, but improving it. And that goes for that is key, whether it's citizen-facing, employee-facing services, internal operations, it doesn't matter. Use these opportunities to look deep into your business processes. And again, this is something that Lixar Microsoft can help you with. The next phase, and this is sort of where we've seen after COVID a huge shift in organizations reaching this service-centered phase of government, which is where we see many countries focusing on efforts and are having success in delivering services which meet the expectations of the people they serve. So that's very key because, again, citizens are used to interacting online, right? They're shopping online, they're banking online, they're doing more online than they've ever done before. So the bar that you need to hit to replicate the user experience that they've come to expect is much higher than it was even 2 or 3 years ago, and that trend's not going anywhere. We've seen some big successes in this space across the globe. A couple that stand out are Denmark and the Republic of South Korea, both of which have invested in understanding the life journey of people whom they serve and grouping services around these life journeys. So for example, all services related to starting a business, entering education, or having a baby are aligned and easy to navigate through a citizen portal, which eliminates the siloed nature that sometimes these services are rolled out, right? You have a citizen profile where everything is interconnected. So really cool example, there are many more. Oh, sorry, just a bit of a lag there. And then finally, what does intelligent government mean? Well, this stage of government is currently the leading edge. At this stage, we expect to see governments learning from the experiences of improving public-facing service delivery, so going back to the last phase, to offer much greater personalization in the way services are being delivered, but importantly, to also use these capabilities to improve their wider government operations. Many crucial areas of government activity have been left untouched during the service-centered government phase of evolution. Within this horizon, we will see governments understanding and embracing the use of data to deliver not just services, but inform policy and to track outcomes and to run their internal operations, all in a way that is accessible, seamless, and in the case of Canada, bilingual. So this is the high watermark, and this is to look for examples of this. Go to your banking app today and see some of the choices that are available, or look at another service that you're familiar with and that you're interacting with on a daily basis, whether it's Netflix, Amazon, it doesn't matter. It doesn't have to be within government, and think about what you like about that experience, and think within your organization, is there a way to recreate that for the services that you deliver as an organization? So I'll pause there. We'll go to the next slide. Trust is a huge component of the way these services are delivered, and nowhere is this more true than in the cloud space. And we really see cloud as a huge way of catapulting yourself up the maturity curve I just referenced, because it creates the opportunity to deploy new services efficiently, reduce the burden of administering the back office that often supports these front office innovations. But security is key. In Canada, just for our government, because we have so many government folks on the call, we have 2 data centers, both outside of both within their own availability zone. So for disaster recovery, backup, redundancy, we're compliant. From a Canada perspective, we're compliant with SOC 2, ISO 27001, 17, and 18, which is the gold standard established by the Canada Centre for Cybersecurity. If you're a Government of Canada customer and you're familiar with Protected B data and ITSG 33, we've been assessed against our ability to comply with that standard, and virtually the entire Azure catalog from a data analytics and AI perspective has been found to be compliant. And we have many customers who have deployed solutions in our cloud and have received their authority to operate from their chief security officers with Protected B data, which is a huge differentiator for us in the market. And so, if you're a Government of Canada customer, or if you're outside of the Government of Canada, but you're familiar with this high watermark that the Cybersecurity Centre for Canada has established, and you want to learn how we can easily help you get there through repeatable processes like having GitHub templates with the configuration pre-done, let us know. And we're there to help have that discussion along with our partners at Lixar and BDO. And then we'll finish up with the last slide. And the last thing I share, this is not to scare you, but it is to point out that data is growing. So the challenge, and I will say the opportunity to adopt services that help you climb that maturity curve is only growing, right? And the number of digital native data sets has never been greater, right? And what I mean by that is it never started as paper. It's always been digital. And trying to break down the silos that exist between these large pools of data to make them a strategic asset versus, frankly, an organizational burden that you have to carry either because of policy or because you don't know whether you're allowed to delete them or move them or do something creative with them, is only growing. So, the time is now to really act around the people and culture, the technology, and the governance, and how they come together to help you propel yourself up that maturity curve. And again, Microsoft BDO is here to support you on that journey. So with more meat on that and some examples of how we've done, I'm going to pass it back to my friends at Lixar, and Jim, I'll turn it over to you. Thanks for the opportunity to speak with you.
Scott, thank you for your time. It's always a pleasure to get into a virtual room and talk about some of the great stuff Microsoft's doing just to help enable us and all of our clients. Good morning, everyone. Jim Provo here in a sweltering hot Ottawa, although I'm told and looking at the radar is pretty much like that across the country and across the continent. Let's start by talking about some data trends as we've seen. I wholly subscribe to what Scott was talking about, and that data is your most strategic asset. And whether it's a small couple spreadsheets sitting on the cloud or on your computer, or just Excel working through, or even something like hundreds of millions of data points every day, the same kind of patterns come through. And when we're looking into the next couple days, weeks, months, quarters, and years, we see the same kind of patterns again and again coming true. So when you think about, how do you track every plane always, right? That'd be one of our clients we're working with is actually able to track down to 5-second resolution, or don't quote me on that, but pretty good resolution where everything is in the world. I mean, when you try and consider the amount of data necessary for that, the amount of centralization required, different people requiring data at different speeds, it all comes together. But foundationally, whether you're looking at a global scale or just Jim Provo Incorporated, data has been and will always be your most strategic asset. And what I mean by that is that, yeah, sure, you might be selling professional services or selling widgets or these really cool little cell phone wooden panels kind of things for your laptops and computers, but foundationally, what makes you better, what drives you forward is data, and using data in a smart and an intelligent way to look forward, right? And those realities have a lot of conclusions to them. You've probably heard the terms volume, variety, velocity. I'm not a big fan of those kind of synergistic kind of words, but really what we're asking about is how much data do you have? Do you trust to be of high quality? Can the right people access it to make decisions in the right amount of time? If you need to make a decision today, you can't use data from weeks ago. That system needs to be up and running, right? Those faster insights come from how they fit together. And then the part we always need to worry about is regulatory compliance exposure. How do these pieces fit together in a way that you can prove you're meeting your needs as you see fit? That's very much in many ways the digital feedback loop, right? Data and AI sits in the middle, but you're talking about things like engaging customers, transforming products, improving the service levels for Canadians and people around the world. By doing so, by enabling people to get data and to use data to make their lives better, you can see those types of significant benefits. Everything from 54% increase in revenue, 54% in profit, 62% in customer satisfaction. Whether you're in the public service and improving the lives of Canadians, or whether you're in the private sector pushing the world forward, making better things, customer improvement, time to market, these things work better when you use data to drive yourself forward. My apologies, I'll be drinking a lot of water as we go through this presentation. But like I said, 100 million data points every day. This, by definition, requires not only the data capability to handle these transactions, but also a culture in which to enable it and go through. Those successful transformations, those companies that look at that data, recognize that this cannot be manual at all. Everything is automated, everything is looked and logged and tracked to make sure that it's working as you see fit. And that really deals, like I said, with two main factors or pillars to look at in terms of data trends: the capabilities of your organization and the culture behind it. Let's start by talking about data capabilities, right? Fundamentally, what you're going to hear me say a lot today is the idea of centralization, taking data and bringing it together to a single spot. When you bring together 3 or 4, or even just 2 data sets that had never been brought together before, that's where you enable insight, machine learning, AI. Real value comes from taking those 2 things that hadn't been brought together and then mashing them together already. That comes from joining data together and ensuring that there's a single source of truth, right? That kind of clear inventory. It provides ease of access, of security of logging, and managing only one set of tools makes your infra teams really, well, their life a lot easier. And that centralization is super important because, like I said, insight comes from that, right? You want to actually ensure that when you're centralizing data across the variety and velocity, that you keep doors open as much as possible, right? That you ensure that the data is not moving too quickly, that you know what's happening. There's a strong governance policy. We'll get to governance a little bit in the earlier in the later afternoon. And of course, single points of management. As someone who has, dealt with operations, worked with Fortune 500 companies, and ensuring a seamless transition and smooth movement of data, you want to ensure that you know exactly when something goes wrong and exactly how to fix it. And if you can reduce the access capabilities, the number of management console, the number of API levels, or how all these pieces fit together, you're going to be in a much faster and a much easier way to ensure you can maintain your systems and your data, and it's high quality going forward. Let's not just talk about data capabilities, let's talk about the culture, right? There's actually a huge culture that needs to be involved in this as well to see how these pieces fit together and ensure that people can use the data correctly. From Lixar's journey and Microsoft's journey, we talk about a 4-pillar approach, talking about foundation, scorecards, analytics, and machine learning. You can't become an AI expert company like the best in the world if you haven't even got your data house in order yet. If your foundation is not secure, if your foundation is not working well, these things start to fall apart. And it's important that you learn to walk before you learn how to run. Companies who embrace a data-driven culture experience a 4 times improvement in the revenue and better customer satisfaction. It just makes sense to use data. It's what you have. It's what's valuable. It's what's useful. But also using data in a way that makes sense, right? Those characteristics of such a culture would include democratizing data. We'll talk about that in 1 second. Empowering people to make impact-oriented decisions, right? I looked at data. I had a theory. It proved right. I went ahead and did it. And also, more importantly, I then logged that decision so we can use that to make better decisions in the future better. Oh, I'm speaking great today. Continually building skills, unlearning and relearning, making sure that from a change management perspective, people are on the same boat and heading in the same direction. But I want to spend a little bit of time talking about that first slide, democratizing access to data and responsibly governing. There's really 2 different types of maturity models we can ask about, one a centralized or decentralized one. And the one that's right for your organization is fundamentally based on the culture in your group, right? If you actually, well, how do I say this undiplomatically, I guess? If you don't trust your directors and managers to have a strong data dictionary, a strong culture of using data correctly, then a centralized approach is better. Here's the reports, here's what you can expect, here's the definitions we're using. If you have that trust, if you're a more mature organization where people can use cool tools like Power BI or Excel and Power Apps to actually get data out of these centralized stores, then a decentralized or self-serve approach is a better way of going about it. Allow people to make more decisions more quickly, more customized to them. That said, decentralization requires that level of trust, requires that level of education and training. It's certainly not a place where you can go and ask 6 different people for a definition and get 6 different answers, right? And if your organization is one like that, where 7 different people have definitions of taxable or client or service, yeah, take a step back, centralize your data, centralize your definitions, and ensure everyone's speaking from the same book. Because when you have those 2 pillars together, when you have the capabilities and the culture come together, that's where the potential comes from. That's where these pieces fit together, and that's how they work together. Specifically with Lixar, when you're looking about next steps at BDO, you'll certainly want to start with either a data state assessment. Let's take an inventory of where you are and what you have. Get on a call with me, right? I'm more than happy to talk to fun people, I guess, and non-fun people about what they're doing in the data world and how we can help them move things forward. And of course, the discovery workshop. Let's sit down and understand where you are right now, where you want to be in 5 years, and every step along the way to get you there. I'm going to pause for a second and see if there's any questions. Also, I'm going to use that as an opportunity to change my slide to the next deck. Yep. Grab a glass of water or something along those lines if you wish, before we introduce Sue Odell. Sue, are you there?
I am here, Jim.
Excellent. Let me use you just to stall for about 5 more seconds.
Okay, so while you're getting set up there, I'll tell everybody I got my second shot yesterday. I'm fully vaxxed as of today. I'm an AZ Moderna experiment. So far, so good. So hopefully everybody's got their shots lined up, and we're that much closer to getting back to normal life. So there, that was about 10 seconds, Jim. Hopefully that's helpful.
Perfect. Thank you. So the most important question I have for you right now, Sue, are you AstraZeneca or are you Moderna?
I'm AstraZeneca. Yeah, that's order of operations, right?
That's the right answer all the time. Sue's here to talk about our cloud adoption framework. We're calling it LCAF, and really just kind of give a highlight as to what we do here at Lixar BDO. So Sue, I'm going to pass the slide and the torch over to you.
Terrific. Oh, hi, everybody, and I'm just glad to have the opportunity to talk to you a little bit more about the way that we're organized in support of everything that Microsoft is doing with the federal government and the public sector. And I want to actually key off of my first point, something Scott Nichols said in his opening commentary around Ottawa Subcommittee, and how impressed he was with their level of knowledge on as it refers to AI and ML. And my first point I wanted to make is actually directly related to that, and that technology has matured to such a point that the table stakes of just managing your data and just managing your applications, like, that's not enough anymore, right? We're past that point. We're living in a world that is unrelenting in terms of consumers. So, citizens of Canada and new immigrants and everyone that the public sector is involved with supporting, and businesses, unrelenting in the expectations that they have in terms of SLAs. That was mentioned by Scott and Jim as well, and the protection of their information. I mean, their expectations are absolute. And so to meet those expectations, it's critical that you don't look at data and applications in silos, right? It's a modernization of your data strategies, your data footprint, leveraging the cloud. It's modernization of your application environment. Do you continue to manage legacy applications? Do you build natively in the cloud? Those types of things. It's a convergence of modernizing your data and modernizing your applications that leads to innovation and competitive advantage. And so in the public sector, it's no different. You're competing on the world stage, on the national stage, to be the best run local government, provincial, national, international government. That is hugely compelling. And so this convergence applies equally to the public sector as it does to any other industry in the world. And so the second thing I'd say, or third, I think now, my Astroderna is kicking in. Convergence is not a destination, right? Convergence is the continuous improvement of that relationship between data and between applications, right? To the benefit of the organization's mission. So, what you're seeing on the screen now is Lixar's framework for this, and this is achieving the digital innovation loop. That's our branding of this convergence that is powered by the cloud. So, and I know Jim's going to get into this in great detail as the workshop goes on, but you cannot achieve the benefits of AI and ML without leveraging the power of the cloud. It is inherently coupled. And so it's really important, if you want to achieve that North Star, to draw upon real-time or near real-time business insights. Jim was mentioning that earlier. That helps you support your decision-making. You can't achieve that North Star without looking at your planning for your department or your team, thinking about what you're seeing on the screen right now, the convergence of data and application modernization to achieve the digital innovation loop, so that you can see things like reduced costs, insights, growth opportunities, SLA improvements, prioritization of all of that. So the great news is that we are absolutely aligned with Microsoft in terms of our priorities in helping customers achieve this digital innovation loop, and to just be as competitive as you possibly can be in the marketplace. So those are my thoughts, Jim.
Thank you, Sue. Really appreciate it. I hate to say my thoughts are the same as yours, but that's probably why we're working together on these types of things and align on these patterns, right? A key pattern we've seen again and again and again is that centralizing data is absolutely important. And a lot of organizations will struggle until they can find a seamless and efficient way to bring those multiple data sources together into a single shop. And the cloud, to me, is like Azure, really makes those types of things work well.
Sure.
Thank you, Sue. I really appreciate your time today. Good luck with the symptoms. I'm getting my shot on Friday, so I hate to say you're a guinea pig for how I'll be feeling over the weekend, but I'm very confident that's exactly how I'll feel on Saturday.
I will be sending you text messages and letting you know by the hour what you can look forward to.
If I was smart enough, we'd set up a little cloud thing and we can actually store stuff in the database and use Power BI.
Wouldn't that be interesting? We should maybe do that. It's a good experiment. Okay, thank you. You're muted, Jim, I think.
Jim, you're on mute.
I'm totally on mute. I was saying some wonderful things. Or did someone mute me? Sue, did you hear me talking when we talked back and forth?
I did when we talked back and forth, and then you went on mute for about 5 seconds. So you're good now.
Fun. Well, thank you, whoever muted me. You're making it fun and keeping me on my toes. Thanks, everyone. I appreciate it. So when we talk about organizations and their journey towards the cloud and the journey towards data maturity, the key thing we find again and again is centralization. And that works best if you're in a cloud-based environment like Azure. And that maturity really comes through as we talk about pieces and how they fit together. And a lot of organizations really struggle in that maturity level. It's difficult, right? Change management is difficult. And IT projects in general, let alone data or AI projects, are difficult. 82% report struggling to become mature users of data, 55% report data silos. Take a step back, see how these common challenges work. If you go back to, well, I'm dating myself with my gray hair here, but if you go back to the 80s, 90s, and a lot of on-prem servers, a lot of on-prem data sources, there's a lot of organizations that ran because some guy had a 486 or a Pentium under his desk that was like the database that can't go down, like a little post note on it. Don't turn this computer off or billing will fall apart. These are true stories, right? And for those on the call that have been in those types of experiences, you see obviously why moving these things to the cloud is a great idea and a no-brainer. Always working, always logging, all of those on-prem analytic solutions brought together and centralized, not only in the data, but also the security and the workloads that make these pieces come together. I'm going to say it again and again. You're going to hate me by the end of this presentation because I'm talking about centralize your data. If you can do one thing today, start to plan to centralize your data, right, at scale across a common platform, across a common language, and how they fit together. Whether it's big data, whether it's huge data, or whether it's just 3 spreadsheets, when you bring them together, you can start to understand those Azure portfolios and how they work. To talk about a recent project Lixar did, I want to talk about work we did for the Canada School of Public Service in regulatory understanding. How can you take every single regulation at a federal and provincial level and bring them together in a way that's seamless, that's understanding, and can drive real insight? Well, the key, big spoiler, centralize and bring everything together. So this project had a couple of key drivers to it, right? How do we actually have multiple use cases and bring them together into a single data set? That need to centralize data helps to understand where that common right answer comes from. And like I said earlier, what Sue alluded to, don't walk before you can run. Don't walk before you can run. Don't run before you can walk, and make sure that you have that digital house in order before you start using AI to find insights and patterns. From a high-level process perspective, that tool is going to actually take all those regulations, whether scraped through FTP folders or online, or there's some internal documents as well, like not Hansard, but equivalent type things. We can actually gather and collect all that information, do transformations, and bring them to an AI model, right? So when I'm going to predict what industries come from a key set of regulations and how they're impacted, this is the type of system and process flow that's going to work on an ongoing basis, whether it's every day, every week, or every month. It has to be seamless, has to be automated, because I don't want to rely on my fingers working in the correct way to ensure that something's going to work in the long term. So not only through regulatory understanding, but whatever your challenge happens to be, right? Common use cases around data analytics really start with a modern data warehouse. How do you bring all these pieces together into a central place? Now you might require, the formal warehouse caliber of data marts and whether it's, data lakes and data bricks, or it might just be 3 or 4 spreadsheets, but bring it together, because once you do, you can then join stuff together and find those insights. You can use tools like Power BI to make decision management decisions. How should we price our product? What should customer service be? At what point do we determine a service level to be so low to be a risk, and how do we improve it? If you want to go a step further, real-time, absolutely the way to go, right? Some people require real-time insights because there's a problem now, and how do we fit those pieces together? Microsoft's architecture and Lixar's plan for solving these pieces is very much based on Azure in the cloud, right? If you look at this in terms of a 3 or 4 step approach, on the left-hand side of your screen, you have all these different types of data sources, whether they're unstructured logs or Excel files or databases, whatever they happen to be. Using a tool like Azure Databricks or Azure Data Factory to orchestrate and ensure the seamless bringing in of that data to a central store is key. And that central store you're seeing in the middle, or model and serve, right? A data warehouse like Azure Synapse or a SQL database, right? A lot of different options here to ensure that we have a central place where all the data is stored. What's the best tool for you? Great question. It depends on the type of data you have. From our previous slides, the volume, the veracity, the truth of it, all of those play key factors to what's the best solution for the needs. And the last thing I want to point out as well is that the right solution is not just based on the data, but also your business use case. I'm a huge fan of real-time data, but I also recognize that I hate real-time data because it's difficult, it's costly, and it's hard to maintain, right? The less you can do in real time, the better off you are from a management perspective, from a efficiency perspective, and a cost perspective. If you don't need to use real time, I strongly suggest against it, but there are use cases where it's necessary as well. And then the box on the right there, visualization, using a tool like Power BI to see a chart, absolutely the way to go, right? Pictures are worth 1,000 words, and the best reports and the best dashboards that people like Beata and Laura and Marcus do on a day-to-day basis here at Lixar BDO, it's the type of chart that you look at and say, right there. That's the problem. That's where I need to look at. That's where we need to fix things because there's a big jut going forward. And that storytelling is key. But when you look at these pieces from a different perspective, you can really recognize how they fit together, right? Ingest and prep, talking about Azure Data Factory. How do I, from a rigorous perspective, connect and touch every single data source I need and ensure that it's logged correctly, ingested correctly, that I get errors if something goes wrong? Right? The biggest problem, or one of the biggest risks I have on my day-to-day life, is a data source with a couple gaps halfway through the day or halfway through the month. So every time something goes wrong, we need an alert logged up. We need to go back and check the code and ensure that it's not our fault and that we can handle that gracefully. Azure Databricks, great tool. Huge fan of Databricks. The system to take huge amounts of data and process it seamlessly and quickly. If you have unstructured data, or if you're working on things like Delta Lakes or data lakes, absolutely the tool for you. I'm a huge fan. But also it's a lot of work, right? If you're just talking about taking a SQL database and a spreadsheet and putting it together, you probably don't need Databricks. You probably need a couple of Azure functions, or maybe Azure Data Factory can use it right out of the box. But the more seamless you can make it, the more efficient you can make it, the better off you are. When we talk about models and serving, we talk about not only centralizing that data in a way that makes it accessible to people who need it, but also in a way that's efficient. If you're running machine learning, if you're doing predictions or outlier analysis or any of that kind of really cool next gen stuff, this is the phase of the 3 to 4 step approach where that's going to be taken. Excuse me a second, need a little bit more water. I was smart. I cut up a little piece of lime and put it in there too, because I'm tired of just drinking plain water after 16 months at home and not having a coffee shop nearby or the coffee machine at the Lixar office nearby. AI and modeling happens in this mid-step, right? How do we take data that's historical, add predictions to it, and serve it to clients in a way that's useful, whether those clients are internal to my department, internal to the organization, or even public, available to the public via APIs or websites along those lines. Foundationally, it's still the same, right? How do I store the data in the right way and serve the data such that I can guarantee and I can audit that only the right people see the data at the right time? And that ends with a tool like Power BI. It might end with an API manager. It might end with various systems to connect data. But if you can and then actually get it and make it actionable, if you can see reports, if you can see useful things out of it, that's where we need to be. And that kind of tool that enables things like role-based access security, so that it knows that I'm in sales versus Michael's in operations, and we see different charts and different data because of our role. That's where real value comes from. Automating that stuff and making my problems go away so I can focus on that which is important. So when we're talking about that regulatory tool that we built with CSPS, you're looking at cool visualizations, right? You want to understand how all the different regulations fit together and are impacted, not just by departments, but regulations, right? You can actually see here that if I were to search for the word, I just picked dairy to prepare for this presentation. Obviously, things like farm producers and agriculture would be impacted. But if you see that red dot by the bottom there, Canadian Dairy Commission, it is farther away from all the regulations than one. In fact, it only shares 2 regulatory equals with Agri-Food Canada. It's an outlier in that respect, which I found very interesting. Also, on the right-hand side, you can see how Department of Finance plays a key role in dairy as well. Many regulations are related to the word dairy and finance. Now, to be super important, to be super pedantic here, we're not just keyword searching on dairy, right? We're actually conceptually trying to understand the meaning of what dairy is, whether it's milk or cow or dairy, or the different environments, the different synonyms, the different similarities to say. Some of these regulations might not include the word dairy at all, but because of correlations between words with other words in the same documents, we know they're related and we know how they fit out. How do we solve a problem like that? How do we do what you're seeing on the screen? Just what you saw on the screen before, right? Taking those pieces, putting them together, collecting data into a central store, and then in this case, performing machine analytics, right? I'll put a little box right in there for training. Performing machine analytics machine analytics, machine learning and natural language processing on those regulations to pull out the insight, to find the patterns where they hadn't been before. Because that data is unstructured, because that data is in many ways a volume of billions, whether millions or billions, we're going to use a system like Databricks. I've talked about that before, right? But Lixar is a Databricks partner, and one of the biggest things I love about it in the cloud is that you only scale up when needed. So in our case, regulations change very rarely, right? We don't need giant clusters running 24/7 to rebuild our models every time. We just need it to happen every time a document changes. So we can check once a day, once a week. We can probably even check once a month. Turn everything up, get it running, have a supercomputer running trillions of calculations per second, teraflops. And then a couple minutes later, turn it off and don't pay for it ever again, right? Those results, fast, at scale, is exactly what we want to do, and exactly why Azure and Databricks is the right fit for this kind of solution. We also use Azure Data Factory, as mentioned, right? How do I keep things orchestrated in a very well curated environment, like a smooth, seamless running machine? Couple of advice for you if you're looking for this kind of solution. Number one, keep things in separate, right? Every data source should have its own completely separate path. I'd rather have 200 paths that are all independent, that are basically the same, than 3 that are very diverse. And the reason for that is support. The reason for that is maintenance. When something goes wrong, I don't need to look through code and figure out what's impacted. If I've done my job correctly from data governance and curation, I can see all the way down the path, and I can see how all the pieces fit together and understand that these 3 reports have been impacted. Tell clients, let them know. This is the one data source that's been broken. Go and fix it, what's going on. Secondly, by keeping everything separate, you can scale as independently as you need. In 2 weeks from now, when that one data source, that FTP client you're looking at, scales and brings in trillions of data, not trillions, but 1 million data points a day instead of the 1,000 you had before, you're not impacting all the other sources, right? You're keeping everything nice and separate and combined. Nice and separate and uncombined. I apologize, folks. But nevertheless, even though you're keeping everything separate and modular, you still want to centralize your logging, your auditing, and your quality control, right? I want a single thing. I want my Azure app on my phone, which I have right now, to actually warn me as I'm going on a run that something's gone wrong and that we're on it, that I can disable Data Factory and disable logic apps on my phone and recognize that someone's already taken the ticket and run with it. That's what allows insights. That's what allows us to find patterns, whether specific patterns like how is dairy impacted by different regulations, or actually outliers and how these pieces fit together, right? When you look at 1,000 different regulations in different formats, how do you find similarities? How do you know which provincial versus international regulations have the same types of patterns? That's what's enabled when you bring data together. That's what's enabled when you bring things together into a single store. So what does that mean for the CSPS and the RUL tool that we built as part of the ITQ? Well, number one, we built a strong foundation, right? We didn't want to just build a tool for fun because we thought it was neat. We wanted to lay a foundation, and Lixar will always want to lay a strong foundation to ensure that this is useful days, weeks, and years down the road. We also set it up using tools like Data Factory, as we just alluded to, that makes adding one more source trivial, right? The entire engine is set up, and marginally adding one more source is a couple of clicks pointing to the right place and bringing the transformation in. Now, what you do with that source could be magical later on, but the fact that it's easy to maintain and easy to improve is a key design decision in what we did. That creates a lower TCO. That creates a lower cost of maintenance and support going forward. You know how these pieces work. You know how they fit together. From the Lixar perspective, we call that hero path. And you're going to see across the top the same type of architecture you saw in those previous diagrams, right? From data sources, use a system like Data Factory to orchestrate and bring things in a smooth and seamless way. Store them in a data lake or some kind of transitional state. This is the data I have that's been transformed. This is where I'm using Databricks or other tools to apply machine learning, to apply predictions and insights. And then use a staging area like Azure SQL or even Synapse at a data warehouse side, based on a variety of factors that I'm happy to get into with you. But really, that kind of reporting and centralization is key. There's that word again, centralization. Using a system like Power BI or any kind of export at the end, you can even actually have Excel connect directly to a machine learning product sitting up in the Azure cloud by just calling a function, right? Like Jim Sales Predict or Jim Risk Predict. And Excel, once set up correctly, knows to call right to the cloud and pull all these pieces together. It's super simple to enable your organization to find these patterns, to find this magic, and have all these pieces work together. Like I said, you don't want to one before you know how to crawl or know how to walk. That's a recipe for disaster, right? AI is super useful and AI is super handy, but until you have your data house in order, until you have centralized all of your data, that roadmap can be a little scarier. Now, HeroPath fits into these pieces right here, but it's super important to make sure that you've thought about your roadmap, that you've thought about compliance and regulatory concerns, because you can do super neat things like actually searching based on different EU regulations and how do they fit into our pieces and how they all fit together. But nevertheless, until you centralize your data, until you make sure this is a seamless and modular place, which is probably going to happen in the cloud, take a step back and understand where you're going for. Do you have any data silos? I'm sure you do, right? I know that even at Lixar we still do, and we're trying our best to get rid of them and bring everything together into a centralized data store. But just think about what can happen when you bring two data sources together that have never been brought together before. For some of our clients, it's as simple as taking marketing data and sales data, or taking customer service tickets and churn, right? The ability to take two things that have never been brought together before and actually see what happens when they're brought together is fascinating. It's powerful, and it is the obvious next step for what you want to do. It's currently 9:57 a.m. Eastern time. That's the end of Act 2. I'm going to take a small break to see if there's any questions, and also cough politely and see if Mike Ballmer's on the bridge, and let him warn that he's coming up next.
Sounds good, Jim.
Michael, how are you, sir?
I am excellent. I am also a Xena mod experiment.
How are you feeling, Mike?
I'm feeling fine. I got mine last Thursday, and it took me, I'd say, 30 hours to get back to normal, and it wasn't awful. So
Okay.
I encourage everyone. And my cell phone reception has gone up significantly. And I'm waiting for other superpowers to kick in.
I wasn't promised that.
Oh, that they don't tell you about that. That's secret.
That's a bonus. Michael, I pass the floor on to you to talk about the solution assessment program, please.
Excellent. I'm presenting a short deck. I promise to only take a few minutes. And just want to walk you through this great program that aligns very closely with what Jim's been talking about. And Scott covered earlier. So the solution assessment program is really all about helping customers to understand what they have in their current environment. And so a lot of what you've been hearing already this morning, and I'm sure you'll hear later, starts with understanding what you currently have and having a good sense as to what you have, and then thinking about that plan and the path to get to that new future state that you want to get to. And our solution assessment program is really designed to help you do that. We work very closely with Lixar to execute this program. At Microsoft, we have a center of excellence around the data collection and understanding what you have in your environment. We use some very sophisticated tools like Mover, Azure Migrate, Unified Cloud, Block 64. So we've got a bunch of different tools depending on your specific scenario and situation. And we'll work with the Lixar team to figure out exactly what is the right tool to make sure we get all of that data. But really, it's all about having a real good handle on what you currently have and what that might look like when you move it to the cloud from a TCO standpoint. Because right now, a lot of this sort of change to the cloud really is also kind of a material change on, how do you budget for this? How do you understand, what this will cost me, right? Everyone has a good sense of the, kind of current environment. I have hardware, I have software, I have operating systems, I have applications. I get it. I can amortize that, and I can put in a budget to cover all that stuff. And now we want to move to the cloud. You get a monthly bill. It's all based on subscription. It's all based on usage. And that can be a little bit scary. And so what we want to do is we want to make sure you have all of that information. So when you think about that new cloud architecture, you have a good sense as to, what is it going to actually cost? And, give me a sense as to what it's going to look like, even before I start thinking about optimizing or, refactoring or rebuilding for the cloud, which of course just makes things so much more better from an innovation and productivity standpoint, but it can also help around how do you cost and how do you build stuff to take advantage of elasticity and plasticity and all the great things that cloud brings for you. And so really that's what the assessment's about. We will work with the Lixar team. We'll come in, we'll run one of these tools, we'll support you to run the tool. We get all that data back and we put it into a Power BI, which then gives you and the team to then kind of go through and slice and dice and say, okay, look, we've identified a project. It encompasses these 5 or 6 servers or this family of servers. What's it going to cost for that section? Or how do we build a plan around just that? And, how do we think about the new licensing for that? And so really it's all about helping you build out the plan. I know we're talking a lot about data here today, but, we have other assessments as well around applications. We have stuff around workplace modernization. And we can do some additional insights. So if you're thinking about a VMware solution, an Azure to VMware solution, we can obviously help you there as well. And so there's I give you the menu of other things, but we'll focus a little bit more specifically just on the data and infrastructure side. Okay. So I think I covered a lot of this kind of in the opening, but really it's about the performance metrics. It's about understanding how your environment is actually running. So it's one thing to know how your environment is set up and architected, but as I mentioned, when you get to the cloud and we start thinking about a subscription model, we not only need to know what the architecture and how things have been deployed, but we need to know, what is the actual usage of those? What's the CPU? What's the RAM? Are servers being, pinned? And is that something we can take advantage with of architecture, or do we need to think about that when we move to the cloud? Or do we have servers that are sitting idle for months out of the year because they're ready when we hit those spikes? And, and is that something that we can use the cloud for and not have to re-architect it exactly the same way? And so these tools and the analysis that we do as part of the assessment can help you sort of think through all of those different options. It's really about kind of helping to, get you through the path from end to end. So the assessment obviously is at the beginning. It's really about understanding what you have and then working, very closely with Lixar and the team is that sort of plan and decide and come up with an idea as to, where you want to go. And then of course, scheduling out that migration and starting to move things to the cloud. And then from there, how do we then continue to optimize? And so the assessment really sort of sets up this this plan from end to end. And I'll show you a couple of screenshots because one of the things that is really powerful from the assessment is, just getting your hands on this sort of level of data is often very tricky to understand, kind of how your current environment is set up and how, how it's working. And so, as I mentioned, it all comes in a Power BI. So these are screenshots, but they're all interactive. They're all variable based on what you click on and what you want to see within your environment. And, so in this example here, based across this customer's entire network, it, looks like it's going to cost them around $21,000. But, if one of the things you want to solve right away is, oh my goodness, we've got some old SQL sitting in our environment, and you were to click on that section in the actual report, then it'll show you what the costs are just for that section as well. So all of these graphs, all of the tables, they're all interactive, they're all dynamic as you start to look through your actual environment. We can do the same around the Windows lifecycle and understand what the operating systems are doing, drill specifically in on the SQL portion and start to look at, not only what versions you are on, but, where are you on your service packs and, is that stuff up to date? And, it also helps with some potential security concerns, making sure that everything's, up and as current as possible. All those things that you may not have to worry about when you get to Azure, because there's that's part of what the cloud takes care of for you. And then we can provide you with the actual lists of servers. So if you want to see specifically what are those servers that are out of support, you can click on this section of the graph and narrow in on that section. This starts to show you kind of as an example as to what I was talking about around performance, right? So you want to look at what's the RAM utilization. You can look at it as an average across all the servers. You can drill in on a particular set of servers, or you can get really focused and narrow in on just one server and, see exactly what's happening for that one actual device. From there, we want to give you the opportunity to sort of think through what are the options. And so not only are there architectural options and rebuilding options, but then there's also ways to license differently in the cloud. And so this is a great tool that allows you to start to think through 3-year RI reserved instances, or 1 year, or should we cost optimize things, or should we right size things based on performance? And so this is a great tool for you to work with on the Lixar team as you're starting to plan out what will your new architecture look like, is to use this slide and kind of go through all those sort of what if scenarios and think about the different costs. The other thing I'll point out on this slide is down here, there's a section here called migration groups. And what we can do is we can tag servers into sort of logical groups for you. And so if you have an idea of sort of group of servers that you want to move or you want to focus in on, we can build that tagging right in. And so then we can show you those different groups of servers and those different sections built in. So you don't have to kind of click through different servers. We can say, well, show me all of my SQL end of life. And, we can build out those different tags for you. We can look through Azure IaaS comparisons and start to drill in there. We can look at storage, and we can also do some of that dependency mapping. So you can see, kind of how the servers are interconnected and what that dependency is. We can do the same thing on the SQL side and start to look at the SQL dependency, something that is often tricky to sort of get your head wrapped around and think about, but this makes it really easy to see how your actual environment is interconnected. We can start to look at managed instance, which is a sort of another way to re-architect and build for the cloud. And so we can show you what that might look like and take advantage of that. Site recovery is obviously something that's very popular, and everyone's looking for a way to make sure that everything's backed up and ready to be restored. So we can show you what site recovery might look like. So that's just a quick look. But what I'll tell you is that I just showed you a few sort of snapshots. The actual data takes about an hour just to go through and sort of get those insights. And so there's lots of really rich data there. We leave the Power BI and all of this data with you and the Lixar team to actually then use as you're planning out your migrations. And so I encourage everyone to take advantage of a solution assessment. I believe there's a survey coming at some point during the event or at the end. In there'll be a question that says, I'm really interested in a solution assessment. Go ahead, click that button, and we'll get back to you, and we can spend a little more time talking about the SA program from Microsoft, or just reach out to your Lixar team directly and let them know you're interested, and we'll be happy to reconnect and talk more about this program. That's it for me.
I, in my script, don't have okay, everyone, let's take the survey now. So I'm going to presume that that's an after.
I believe it comes at the end. Yes.
Thank you so much for your time. What I hear from what you're talking about, Michael, is really, there's a lot of value in this data, but it needs to be centralized, and you need to find a way to bring it together. And that's often the most difficult part, right?
Yeah, it is often difficult. And, we've, work with customers who tell us that, they spent the last 4 months trying to get to this level of data and, barely scratch the surface. So it's a great way to sort of get that current state architecture and understand exactly what your current environment looks like, which is obviously that sort of beginning point to start thinking about the future. So it's a great tool. It's a great program. And I don't know if I mentioned it as some point during this presentation, but we offer this as an investment to our customers. So there is no cost to you to go through an assessment. Maybe I shouldn't have buried that headline at the very end.
Makes a lot of sense, right? We're here to figure out what's best and make the best choices. And in doing so with data is the best place to be.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you.
Michael, I'm going to stop you presenting and then share my screen again. To everyone on the call, it is 9 minutes past the hour. We do have a break coming up in about 21 minutes or so. But what we're going to talk about first is governance, because, it's very much the most important thing that people either forget or don't think about. Actually, let me rephrase that. It's the most important thing. And sometimes people forget or don't think about it. Why? Because it's a hassle. Why? Because it's difficult. Why? Because it's the unsexy stuff that doesn't have the pretty charts at the end. But nevertheless, let's talk about governance, because it is something that you need to really worry about. 5 things we'll be talking about in the next 20 minutes. And I do talk quickly. I apologize. Oh, and here's my lovely wife bringing in a coffee. Oh, my daughter. Thank you, daughter.
You're welcome.
Oh, it's Starbucks. I'm going to be talking even more quickly afterwards. I warn you about that in advance. What is data governance? Why do we need it? What are the requirements for going governance? The framework itself and the technology needed. Foundationally, data governance is exactly what it sounds like. Ensuring that data is the way it's supposed to be and that things are lined up in a way that we can understand and we all agree and we're all aligned, and this is how decisions are made. It runs the gamut from who gets to see data to who's in charge of data quality to how all these things look and fit together. Why do we need data governance? Foundationally, because digital transformation is either coming or it's here, or you've fallen behind. But that demand for data gets better and better and bigger and stronger and stronger. And when I think about organizations that I've been to where, for example, give me the definition of a full-time job, an FTE. I remember talking to 6 different people and getting 6 different definitions. Well, of either it's part-time or either it's 2 part-time jobs, or saving a job is the same as creating a new job. Those definitions matter. Because when you're using data to drive your organization, when you're using data to make sure these pieces fit together, you need to make sure you're on the same page, right? And that has a huge impact on organizations and a huge impact on government and how all these pieces fit together, right? It allows for optimizing of operations, saving costs and being more efficient. It lets you transform services and empower employees. There's so much good that can happen, but if people are not on the same page, if people have different understandings of who's in charge of what and who's the steward of what, things start to fall apart. And that gets even more and more complex as time goes on, right? Our data estates are getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And there's so many different aspects of data. There's so many different types of data. I know when I go on a run, at least I try and go on a run, I'm terrible at it. I'll put my phone on here with the Strava app so I can actually track my mapping. And then I put a little heart rate monitor on because Provos aren't known for the best cardiac health. But putting all these things together are super important. But it's all these different types of data, right? I empathize with and really respect the people in charge of the app and making sure that all those pieces fit together and that certain people have access to data, but certain other people only have access at aggregated levels. All these things work together. I want to talk about an example project that Lixar did with the Treasury Board under the ATIP program, Access to Information, right? It's a huge and now that I've learned more about it, an incredibly challenging problem. How do you govern data when you don't really have control over it, right? ATIP, at least in Canada, for those in America, the Freedom of Information Act is a similar analogy. How do you put these pieces together when it's actually different departments that control the data? It's not Treasury Board. Treasury Board owns the process, but all the different departments, the Wheat Board, National Defence, Parks Canada, they all have their own systems. So when each organization does it their own way, you have a bunch of headaches, right? You have a standardization headache. You can't guarantee quality of data because you're not in charge at the end. You have latency concerns, right? What if someone takes 30 days to finish something and they said they get it done in 20? If it's not under your control, if you're not accountable for the results in that respect, it's difficult. But this creates a perfect opportunity and a perfect use case for machine learning and AI. And the 2 things that Lixar did as part of the ATIP project was, number 1, we looked at all the stuff that had been done before. Hey, if an ATIP request is already finished that really seems to match what you've done, why not just go get the one that's finished, right? Don't have everyone redo everything again. You want it, it's right there. One of my favorite ones, you can go find it. There's an ATIP request on Sasquatch, on Bigfoot. Seriously, you can go find it. And so someone made a request and it went to RCMP and DND and all those different people, all those organizations, and they came back with the 30-page report. When Lixar asked for it, because yeah, I'm going to look for that report. When Lixar asked for that report, we just said, yeah, it's already been done. Can I just have that one, please? Right? That makes it a lot faster. That makes it a lot smoother. Machine learning and AI is doing that, right? Machine learning is reading my request, looking at all the ATIP requests that have been finished already and says, yeah, these couple ones seem similar. Do you want just that instead? That's the tricky thing to do if you don't have high quality data, if you don't have good governance. And like I said, that data landscape is getting more and more complex over time. And all these different data sources, remember we talked about data factory and the pieces coming in, all those data sources need strong governance and strong compliance and making sure that things are doing as they're supposed to be doing, right? That could be data across edge systems, IoT, or phones like this. It could be transaction processing applications, tickets, service desks, all those types of things. It could be analytical systems from other storages or graph databases, whatever other data source you have. You sit and figure out where it is, how does it fit into the big picture, and how they all work. The alternative, frankly, is you're going to have a system that looks like this, right? You're going to have sheer mayhem. Whether you like it or not, governance is your problem. So you can either ignore it and hope it goes away and get stuck with this, or you can do the data equivalent of gorgeous cable management, have everything lined up nice and pretty, and have everything working well, right? Unstructured content can be fracturing as well, but if you understand governance, this is the data, this is who's responsible for its quality, these are the people that consume it, and here are definitions going through. All those things come together. It doesn't have to be this data we're used to, right? It doesn't need to be news feeds or FTP or SharePoint workspaces or funny pictures of cats, right? IoT is changing the world. Whether it's sensors in traffic lights or like heart rate monitors on my chest as I'm trying to run down the street here in Ottawa, all these pieces mean there's more data and a higher risk of things going wrong if you don't take governance into account and its importance. Managing those sources as they come together is super important, making sure that you can identify all the key factors and decision points that get made and ensuring someone is in charge of it. More importantly, they know they're in charge of it, right? More importantly, recognizing and saying, yeah, this data coming out of your shop, I consume it for my bit. And if you change stuff, I need to know. That's why enterprise data governance is super important, right? Business operations are impacted by this. Business operations are reliant on data if you're doing it right. We saw that in the first couple slides about data data architecture and the future of data stuff. The future of data stuff. I'm going to pause for a second and gather my thoughts. Especially in the public service, especially when you're talking about compliance, these things are ridiculously important. Because if data is, to use the term correctly, ungoverned, there could be data breach, brand damage, poor decisions made. The data told us to go left, but actually it said negative left, which is right, but we didn't think about it. Ungoverned data is a risk that needs to be mitigated like any other risk across an organization. So what are the requirements to help you govern that as part of a modern data enterprise? Well, the requirements for governing data, I'm going to go quickly through this. Don't worry, we can come back to the slides. jpro@lixar.com if you want to talk about it more. But foundationally, what we're saying will sound like common sense because in many ways it is. The requirements for governing data require clear definitions, clear data entity and discovery, a clear ownership of the people who are in charge, right? I'm going to use my mouse here. Stewardship is the word. Stewardship is the key. How do these pieces fit together? And how do you say, yeah, if something goes wrong, that's the person to talk to. That person is in charge not only of data quality, but the process around it. I get it from here. These are my transformations. This is the data that comes out. And if you can do that in a kind of a microservices approach, all these different pieces that are responsible together, it can scale well. That stuff comes together in terms of policies, right? Across the organization, this is how we roll. A good analogy is if you've ever heard like the AP style guide, how do you spell the word Canada? That's a terrible example, but for special cases of words, how do you spell email? Is there a dash in it or not? Is it a capital E? There's a standard guide that says if you work for the AP, this is how you spell email. And the data equivalent of that is a key part of governance. Like I said, when you're looking at common vocabularies and business glossaries, it's super important, right? My FTE example again. Well, is it a full-time job? But do we include having saved jobs or not? What about 2 part-time jobs? If they sum up to an FTE, does that count as basically the same? These definitions matter because if 2 different groups in the organization are making claims or running decision management, or even more scary, control management, C&C based on different definitions, you'll get different answers. So step 1, take a step back and do an inventory. Look at everything you got, right? These are all of our servers across all these different places. What data are we collecting? Where is it being stored? You'll notice the one question that's missing from this list on the left is why. When you're doing an inventory, why is great, but it's not that important yet. Hold on. What do you have? Who's in charge of it? No one's in charge of it? Okay, let's highlight that row. But understand how all these pieces fit together. Is it good quality data? Are there duplicates? Are there copies of it? How sensitive is it? Do I need to worry about GDPR or PIPEDA or various privacy laws around this data and how it fits together? Once you have a list of all your data sources, you can look at the roles and responsibilities for each of those data sources and how they all fit together into the big, what's called master data management, or MDM, right? I'm not going to go through all these questions, but again, a lot of common sense, a lot of just going through and asking and being sure. The role of an auditor is not the role of an auditor is not an incorrect analogy for what we're talking about today in data governance. All right. For this data, who is the owner? Who has a glossary? Do they know if they're compliant across regulatory stuff? Who ensures data is consistent across all these different systems? Whether it's for a single data source, a department of many data sources, or an organization of many departments of many data sources, there is common policy. There is common curation needs that need to happen across the entire organization. How do you govern and maintain definitions? How do you classify data? How do you actually detect data quality problems and remediate them? These are problems that Jim Provo, Director of Sales Engineering, should not be responsible for just at my level, because data quality and remediation should happen at the organizational level. This is the data from my group that I bring into the organization that affects decision making at the partner level and the CEO level. This is how I know it's good quality, and this is how I know if something's gone wrong. Because the scariest thing, that's a superlative. One of the scariest things is if you don't know if your data is wrong or not. What's worse than no decision is the wrong decision. Therefore, at an organizational level, we're going to be talking about policies and rules to govern data, right? Data integrity, which is quality, where it's stored, how it's ingested, how it's translated. Is there privacy concerns, right? The idea of saying every data source, this is for, I think, SOC 2 compliance, right? Every document we have needs to be tagged with a confidentiality level. And we need at Lixar to prove beyond the shadow of a doubt that people can't see confidential data unless they're in an access group that allows them to do so. Auditing is important. When all those pieces come together in terms of quality, maintenance, ingestion, retention, destruction, that's called master data management, right? Master data management says, here's all my different data sources. Here's the rules that we're all going to play together regardless of what we do. I don't care if you send data off to our distribution network so they understand how many sales we have, or you're using machine learning and data science to do predictive insights about how many we need to build next month. Here are the common sets of rules and definitions that we shall use to understand how these pieces fit together. I can't believe I'm talking this quickly and haven't even taken a sip of this drink yet. Master data management includes, I would say, two major components that people don't think about. Number one, the data itself, right? Here's a box, it's moving across these pieces. This is how we coordinate it. But what's called metadata as well, right? Metadata, I'm sure you know from various controversies in your life as well going through. Metadata is all the information about the data. Document type, who's the owner, date created, all that kind of stuff. That metadata has lineage as well, right? And part of your master data management actually has to say, okay, I understand how these pieces fit together and how they run through. Data processing, storage, reporting, and maintenance, they all have metadata lineage concerns as well. And lineage is important because governance, foundational, if you want to sum it up, is pretty much, I don't care what you do internally, but the interface with anything else. This is the input you use. This is the output you use. I like to use this definition of governance because at a high level, it implies all the other stuff we talked about. You're in charge of this piece of data. You're in charge of its quality, its upkeep, its maintenance, its logging. If I need to talk with you, this is the format we use. And if you need to talk with me, this is the output we use. I know I'm a nerd. I'm an engineer, right? This is very much the microservices architecture approach from the first set of slides we talked about in the hero path. But nevertheless, if we can keep things nice and separate, we can work really well together. And then when all that data becomes centralized across master data management, you can change the world. Here's an internal chart we have about that ATIP request thing we talked about, right? We can actually then look at all the different ATIP requests that have been done in the past, I want to say decade, but don't quote me on that. And from each of the different departments, what are the keywords that pop up? Health Canada had 4,000 requests, and here's the things people are looking for. Let's dig in, let's drag through stuff. Now, this is just an animated GIF, so I can't click on things if you guys go on mute, but if you want to play with this, come talk to me afterwards and we'll see if we can set it up. Data governance and lineage perspective, it's not doing anything that's very surprising to you. Let's start at the top and work our way down, right? Data collection, searching an index, going through. This is very much the hero path interpretation in a Spark Apache platform. Go through, collect data, transform it, store it, build a model, go through. All those pieces fit together. And from that, because we now centralize data, because each different department of the government, but also each finger quote department within this tool and this platform all work together and have an agreed upon common standard. We can do stuff like request by keyword. This is a really neat chart because I'm going to search on the word terror. And you're going to actually see that, unsurprisingly, the most ATIP requests are for CSIS and the RCMP. The third most, Parks Canada. That's weird. Why is most requests for ATIP coming from Parks Canada? If you look at there on the bottom right-hand side, I'll wait for it to come back again, you will see that those responses over time and the average number of pages for the word terror from Parks Canada is for copy of documents pertaining to the HMS Terror. There's a ship out there called the HMS Terror, and there is someone out there, some Canadian, God bless them, whoever they are, and what they do is every month they basically sit down and say, hey, more documents on the HMS Terror, please. This is insights that come through when you bring data together. This allows organizations like Park Canada to even put a little post note on their computer. Oh yeah, the HMS Terror guy is going to write again. Let's get everything set up. Let's be more efficient. That happens when you have strong data governance and when you fit these pieces together in an efficient and seamless way. All right, so let's talk about the data governance framework, right? How do you now make this into a rigorous, strong, enterprise-wide protocol? You find a way to change our screen. Start with the vision at the top, right? And those vision turn into people, processes, policies, and technology. Those are the 4 pillars of a strong data governance framework and how you can ensure that what you're doing works across the board. Whether it's in multiple cloud environments, on premises, whether you have different data centers or edge or IoT or phones in the background, whatever it is, when you understand who it is, what they do, how they do it, and with what technology they do it with you're in a better place. So those components include the vision and strategy, the actual data itself, the roles and responsibilities, people, the process and activities and how they apply, process, the policies and rules to govern data, policies, and then the data governance technology. That's both where stuff is kept, but also the systems that can sit back and watch to ensure things are working correctly. I'll go quickly through these slides, but like I said, geoprobe@elixir.com or catch me up on LinkedIn if you want to talk more about this and how it would fit in your organization. Vision and strategy is really about stakeholders and vision, right? This is what we want to do. This is why we do it. This is why it's important. The spirit of governance in a mature organization is known by everyone. I don't need to know the exact words of the policy, but I know our spirit. I'm going to make the right decision based on that. That's always a good idea. The data to be governed, right? Like I said, do an inventory. Here's all the pieces. Here's how they work together. Whether it's customers, employees, products, invoices, every action you do can create data and can have importance. As a bit of a digression, it's super important to not just go to town and collect every data point you can. Have a why, have a reason. Even if you don't know exactly what the reason is or will probably be valuable, at least think about it and consider it. Another part of that policy is organizational roles and responsibilities. If you have a CDO or a CDIO or an OCDO, depending on the different groups I'm thinking of, right? You have someone who's in charge of organization and data governance. And that could either be a control board model, whereby we have, the executive different control boards that go down to working groups, or there's also a data entity approach, right? Where data governance is run not by organizational structure, but by type of data. We're in charge of the order data. We know what works out. We're in charge of the product data. We're in charge of the service ticket data. The thing I want to point out that's really important is that there is no one size fits all, right? I don't want you to come out of this presentation thinking, yes, we're going to be a data entity-based approach to governance. I don't know what that is, and you don't know what that is. Sitting down together and figuring out what works for the organization and what drives things is the key approach. So how do you do that, right? Let's talk about processes. That's step 2 of the governance policy. Processes is exactly what we think it is, right? It's BA work, it's BI work. It's sitting down and saying, as a systems engineer, here's what we try and do, and here's how we do it. Term like standard operating procedure, SOP, probably comes to mind. If this is your space, you're my kind of people, and I'd love to talk about this until the cows come home. I love process, I love systems. So how do they apply to the data lifecycle? Data governance and policy rules are applied and enforced. And the more automated this can be, the better off you are, right? That kind of common business vocabulary is not something that I want people to type in because Elixir is not great at spelling, right? We'll have 4 different people who talk about vocabulary and spell it in different ways. If I can actually use something simple like a drop-down box, here's your choices, pick it for me. Elixir has done work a step further. In the airline space, we've actually said, hey, we've read what the service ticket is, and we're going to categorize it for you. Are these the right categories? Check, check, check. Yes, and just press OK. Stronger staff, more efficient, higher quality data, happier staff, right? Hey, we've done this work for you already. Is that better? Great. That common business vocabulary is just one piece of the data catalog. All these other functions are something that you either need to worry about at a big level or small level based on your organization. You might not worry about self-service data prep tools because you're more of a centralized BI store. Remember back to the beginning, centralized versus decentralized? But either way, go through as part of data governance and check all these pieces off and make sure you're going down the right path. That data catalog serves two functions. I've talked a lot about it being a stick, right? This is actually how it has to work. This is how you do things. But it also has a strong carrot associated to it as well, right? It's a place to discover data people didn't know of before. Hey guys, this is our Bible, for lack of a better term, right? This is all of the catalog of all the data we have. And if you want to use something, this is who to talk to. And if you have questions, this is where you go see it from. That discovery happens ideally anywhere around the world, any data system, right? Every source has a bunch of data and you can log it down. And if you have privacy concerns or regulatory concerns, you can actually say, yeah, some of this stuff is sensitive. Rows or columns of data sensitive. When that policy comes through, when that's automated as part of your cloud strategy and your roadmap, it makes your life a lot easier. I know the customer service people cannot see source system 3 attribute 4. It's marked private. They can't see it, right? I know that the advertising people don't talk to the journalists at the newspaper. They can't see the list of advertisers. Our data governance policy prohibits it. It's not possible, right? That's just one of many examples about how these rules get implemented, whether it's people can't see data or not, or it's data integrity, right? Every account needs a project. Every project needs an account number. All of these quality rules improve data quality and presume you're doing things correctly. That's where policy comes in, right? This is how we decide how these pieces fit together. And those policies are quality, integrity, access security is a very huge one, right? To guarantee that the junior co-op can't see the treasury data is something that should be provable and something that should have a policy that someone somewhere is in charge of ensuring is correct. So when we go back over all those different boxes, all those pieces we saw before across all the different data sources that we talked about, we can say this is how these pieces work together, right? Whether it's on a data entity level or an organizational unit, like I said, there's many different ways of approaching this. You're still going to say, how do these pieces fit together? Who can see them? Why? People, policies, process, and technology. Boy, that last one not being a P bothers me, but we're just going to let that hang in the air awkwardly. More importantly, to everything we're saying right now, it's important that this is not a one-off thing, right? Governance is a living, breathing entity, a living, breathing document instead of a framework, and that continually updating of how these pieces fit together is important. Governance can't just be, okay, guys, we're done. This is how it sets up now. It is a recurring process, right? It is ensuring that policies are upheld. It is ensuring that resolution occurs correctly. It is ensuring that when the business changes and service lines for Canadians change, that everything is adapting and working as it sees fit. That leads to possibly the hardest challenge here about managing master data, right? Data governance is increasingly becoming interdisciplinary. And what I mean by that is all these pieces are fitting together across organizations, across workloads, across parts of the company. And it can't just be one guy in the corner. Hey, I'm the guy in charge of data governance. It can't be that anymore. There's too much on the line, right? Discovery, what do I not know that I wish I knew? And compliance, right? What's my exposure to risk, and am I doing things in a compliant way? I choose my words carefully this time. What are you doing for compliance is an employee question, a department question, a team question, a BU question, and an enterprise question, right? At each of these levels, we need to ensure people are using data as they're supposed to and how they go through. So those elements of successful data governance are really fourfold, right? Managing the growing data landscape. We talked about that. Take a step back, do an inventory, understand all the pieces you have. Overcoming operational silos. When you centralize data and bring it together, stuff just works. Insights get made. Everything is more efficient. Everything is more seamless. Everything is quicker to work at. But overcoming those silos is key. And governance is the carrot versus stick balance to possibly break those up. Guys, we need to do an entire inventory. No, you're not special. No, you're not a snowflake. We still need your list of all the data you have and how you do it. From doing so, we increase data agility. Even just one case of a person recognizing, oh, you have customer service tickets? Yeah, I need that, please. even finding one case where data was duplicated and copied and they were both out of sync and everyone should just point at a single place. That makes it worth it. That's the ROI. That's the benefit. That's the business case for what we're talking about, if only that. Similarly, industry regulations, right, to comply with what needs to get done, to guarantee and prove systems work is the basis of master data management, is the basis of governance across any compliance framework. Your master data management, your MDM, will have data discovery, curation, storing, and publishing. This is what we have. This is where it's stored. This is what we do with it, and this is how people see it. Again, same kind of idea, right? People, processes. Got the third one in technology. Nevertheless, it's the same thing, right? How these pieces come in. Master data synchronization. As things change, do we adapt? Do we look every month to ensure that the quality is still there, that compliance is still happening, and people are still doing the right thing? Governing maintenance of master data. That's what we're talking about, right? How do these pieces fit together from an enterprise level to ensure everyone is doing as they see fit? And that requirement is for integrated I'm sorry, that's a poorly phrased sentence, and I'm going to work on that one. But foundationally, what we're talking about is that whether it's transactional data, common data, and analytical data or control data, it's the same idea, right? Here's my common silo for metadata, for actual data, and how the pieces fit together. That governance is super, super important, whether it's a CRM system, an ERP system, customer management, or supply chain management. Putting all that data together is ridiculously valuable, and that's what Lixar and BDO does on a day-to-day basis. If you're going to centralize your data, which you should be, then I want you to think about the key things, right? How do we define those interfaces and how do we set them together? And then how does governance affect when we put them together and centralized? Common security system, common auditing system, common logging system. When all those things come together, alerting is a lot easier. Management and data governance is a lot easier. And that's how those pieces fit. Data governance is foundationally not a difficult thing to talk about. It's not a difficult thing to consider on the conceptual level. It does get more challenging when it's actually time to sit down and do the work, right? Whether it's a CDO office or a different working group in your organization and structure, it's a dollars to donuts kind of job, and it's important and has to get done. And if you have any questions about how to fit those pieces together, jprov@lixar.com, come talk to us. We'd love to help. At this point, I'm 7 minutes over. I do apologize for that. Let's take a bit of a shortened break. Marianne, if you're on the bridge, I'm going to suggest we get back together around 10:50, so 5 minutes later than we did before, and we'll wrap up with some talk about AI and ethics and how these things fit together.
Yeah, that sounds beautiful, Jim. Thank you so much.
All right, folks, I will see you in 13 minutes. All right, welcome back from break. Hope everyone had a chance to go get some water, stretch their legs. If I was smart, I would stand up for this. Oh, well, I'll stand up after the presentation. Let's talk about AI and how this fits together, right? I think the big thing of what we talked about today and the big takeaway is if you centralize your data, you're in a spot to do better work, stronger work, more efficient work. And that's no more true than in machine learning or AI. If you've seen some of my other presentations, all of machine learning can conceptually be broken down into having a lot of historical data and some kind of known right answer. But what's often forgot or overlooked are all the pieces around it that are necessary to ensure that works together. We've talked a lot about those today. We talked about the architecture of how data comes in, scale at infinite and basically infinite levels. We talked about the governance around data in terms of quality to make sure that the predictions aren't crap, but also security and who has access to what. And can you prove that there's no bias in your model because it's not possible for my machine learning team to have seen these protected fields in this protected data? Let's talk a bit more about how these pieces fit together. In the world of technology, there's really been moved in the world of software development. They've moved towards a CI/CD, continuous improvement, continuous deployment kind of model. It's called DevOps, right? Code reproducibility, testing, and app deployment in a more automated and fast way to go. That DevOps actually tackles a lot of challenges within the software development launch cycle. I remember being woken up at 4 a.m. by a phone call saying, Jim, the deployment failed. Can you get on a bridge? That doesn't happen as much anymore, right? Because everything is tested beforehand. Everything is going through test cases automatically and independently and launched, on a daily basis or an hourly basis. Machine learning has that same process. It's called MLOps because we like to steal ideas that have done before. But how do you take code reproducibility versus small reproducibility? It's the same kind of idea as before. Whereas software development can be considered writing code to do things, Machine learning and MLOps could be considered dealing with data to do things. So all the same processes apply, all the same validation and testing and deployment and retraining, all those things would be the same in terms of a software development and CI/CD kind of model. That's important though, specifically from a responsible AI perspective. Nearly 90% of organizations that have encountered ethical issues with the use of AI. Those numbers are staggering. Question, in the last 2 or 3 years, have issues resulting from the use of AI been brought to your attention by a country, by executives? Ethical AI is coming, responsible AI is coming, if it's not already here. I'm biased, right? Having been part of the member of the CIO Standards Council of Canada and the Center for Humanity and various other places working on ethical AI and auditing AI, there is an approach to these types of things, right? Principles, practices, and tools. Hey, PPT again, same from governance, right? That approach to AI to say, we care about bias, we know reliability and safety, we know about transparency, all these pieces fit together, not just in nice, soft, fuzzy words, but actually quantifiable, provable math that says, no, we know and can prove to you with math and statistics that our stuff is not biased. Practices in terms of governance and committees, documentation, this is how we do work, and then tools to ensure that we can guarantee that this is working well. MLOps in this respect feels an awful lot like the data governance slides we just saw before. Wow, that's why they're next to each other in this presentation. So when we talk about the 7 principles of responsible data and AI, we talk about things like bias and reliability, security, inclusiveness, transparency, accountability. I can do an entire hour on each of these things by itself. I'm not going to right now because of brevity and time, but if anyone wants to learn more, like I said, jproelixir.com, we're happy to get into the math as to all these different pieces work. To start with bias and fairness, right? Systems should treat everyone in a fair and balanced manner and not affect similarly situated groups in different ways. There's a really fascinating implication to this. To ensure that I'm not being biased across what's called a protected class or protected category, I sometimes need to gather that protected category. Otherwise, I can't know if there's bias or not. That's part where the industry really hasn't figured this out yet, but we're trying to get there as well. There's bias in word embeddings, right? So when I actually think about actual terms like he being brother and she being sister, that's how English works. But if you were to take the English language, translate to a separate language, and then translate back, you start to see bias teased through, right? The guitarist gets translated to he, but the vocalist gets translated to she. The doctor gets translated to he, but the nurse gets translated to she. That bias is not the fault of machine learning, right? Machine learning just looks at the data and says, here's the best answer. That's a data problem. So that's a data governance problem. So that's a data quality problem. And if we're not thinking about it and we're not trying to improve this, we're not going to get better. Next item, reliability and safety. This goes without saying, right? Systems must operate reliably and safely when they function in the world. Different environments, different organizations will have different definitions of what reliable means than what safety means. I don't care as much about if I get a poor Spotify recommendation, but I care an awful lot if a police camera arrests me because I look like a suspect, even though it doesn't look like me at all. Definitions of reliability are very different across workload, across organization, and business need. Item the third, privacy and security. This one also ties very tightly with data governance. Systems should be secure and respect privacy. This means not only from a regulatory perspective, are you GDPR compliant? Are you COPPA compliant? Are you HIPAA compliant? SOC 2, oh man, so much work. Are you compliant though? But also the spirit of this is important as well. If I'm a developer doing work on a day-to-day basis, do I understand the need and desire of security of my clients and the benefit to my organization? And am I making the right choices on a day-to-day basis about even things like database column naming to ensure that we keep the privacy and security of our clients' data as sacrosanct? Similar to the idea of inclusiveness, systems should empower everyone and engage people. There's a wonderful chart I saw recently about equity versus equality and how they're not the same thing. If we're not thinking about these decisions when we decide to make a program, when we decide about data governance, then it's too late. Then you end up with mixed messages. Then you end up with poor quality. Then you end up with machine vision systems that look at this picture, for example, of Hillary Clinton and says, I'm not super confident, but I think that's a man doing a skateboarding trick at night. Now, why did it pick man? I can guess why it picked night. It's a darker color, right? There's a light on the side. but machine learning just finds patterns in data, whether it's words, whether it's pictures, whether it's transactions of service tickets in your database. It'll just look for patterns. What's key then is transparency. What's key is to say, this is why my system made the decision that it did, and this is what went into that decision. That transparency needs to be understandable. We'll talk about that a bit in a second as I wrap up in the next couple slides, but let's go on to accountability. I think that's Montreal. No, that's New York. I want to say that's New York. I want to say I shouldn't care about as much of these things as I do, but here, but here we are. Everyone is accountable for how technology impacts the world. From developers who are told and have to make decisions, to the executives who have to go through, to those who are ultimately accountable if something is ethical and going wrong. It's everyone's decision every time. It's important that people consider they have an obligation to write ethical code that does ethical decision making, because now, as cynical as this sounds, we can break ethics and be immoral at scale. And that's something that's changed in the past 20 years. It's a little bit frightening. How do you put these actual principles into practice? What can you do so we're not just talking conceptually about this, but actually living these things day to day? Envision, define, prototype, build, launch, and evolve. You start with envisioning, right? You start with understanding, about thinking the spirit of what we're trying to do. Who are these people? What could go wrong, and how do we mitigate it? Government of Canada has done a great job with the algorithmic impact assessment tool to say, hey, if you're in the government of Canada and you're going to do AI, this is what you need to do. This is how you score things to say whether it's a low, medium, or high risk. And then different controls are put on based on what those controls are. Like I said, context is important. The controls around me getting a poor Netflix recommendation, although it's going to ruin my night, is not the same as whether I'm approved for a loan or not. It's not the same as to whether or not facial recognition lets me get into a building or not. Those responsible conversational AI roles, how those things fit together, stupidly important. As I mentioned earlier, Lixar is proud, I want to say founding member, but I don't think that's true. Certainly a proud member of the CAI Strategy Council of Canada. We're working together to build this ethical AI framework, to say this is how you do it. This is the approved policy from the nation that's been blessed by the Standards Councils to say, yes, this is how you can implement secure cybersecurity, citizen trust, digital identities, and in my case, the work that I did, ethical AI. Once those things are defined, you have a better understanding of how they fit together, right? For each of your pieces of data, for each workload or product or service offering, what are the principles and what metrics do you use to measure how they work? Microsoft has a really neat idea from the research group called data sheets, right? So very much like those data sheets for not toxic chemicals, but dangerous goods, right? So here's what the data is, here's how it works, here's how it's used. When we built this AI model, here are the scores in terms of bias or precision recall, F1, if you want to get into the actual metrics, that actually drove what we have. You can look at it and make decisions based on this. That leads to prototype, right? Take a step back, do it at the basics. Are the data that you're getting out of the results useful for what you're looking for and how they fit together? How do they affect the system? How do they model together? That might work with something like the Fairness Toolkit. There's a lot of really great libraries out there to help understand if what you're doing is fair. Fair is an interesting term. Let's talk about that in a second. When you talk about fairness, you're not saying if a model is good or bad. You're saying as to whether it's good or bad across different demographics or protected classes. I don't care if a model is crap as long as it's crap for everyone. Well, I do care because I don't want it to be bad, but I would not call it biased. There's a system out there called LIME. LIME is just one example of systems to say what's important, what's driving the decisions for these models. And so the example I'm going to give you right now is an image one, but it doesn't have to be. It's just one that makes conceptual more sense. Let's say I wanted to build a machine vision model to identify tree frogs. So I can take that picture on the left and say, yeah, that's a tree frog or not. What LIME does is it breaks up the photo into many, many little random chunks, fractal chunks, as you see here on the right-hand side, and then will randomly remove part of the picture and see what the prediction for a tree frog is, right? So in that top image there at the left, a lot of it's been grayed out, but there's still 85% confidence you're looking at a tree frog. The picture in the middle, a lot of other pieces grayed out, very low confidence it's been a tree frog, right? And in doing so again and again and again and again and again, LIME can say, here are the important parts of the picture that lead me to believe this is a tree frog or not. Things like this help you understand where bias comes from, where the decision making of an AI model came from. Thanks, Brad. I know this is your slide. There was a model that came a while back that said, hey, I want to actually predict a model that showed the difference between wolves and dogs, right? Huskies and wolves. So in this case, you can see 6 different examples of pictures of wolves or huskies. And in every case, except for one, the AI model got it correct. That picture on the left was actually thought it was a wolf, turns out it's a husky. When you use Lime on the model to figure out what this is, you actually get this, right? You can see all the spots that were important to make the decision as to whether this was a dog or a husky. And in this case, as you see, all the bits of the white, all the snow is what made the decision. The people who built this model didn't build a wolf versus husky detector. They built a snow detector. It just happens that all the pictures with wolves had snow in the background. This is bias in action. This is then looking at the data and saying, okay, hold on, what's wrong with our data? How can we go back and make a more fair model? In this case, what I would do is I would find pictures of wolves without snow, maybe huskies with snow, or try and abstract the background away, make it less of an important feature or factor going on. That model interpretability, understanding how these pieces fit together, very important. Those things to understand why decisions were made in the way they were, super important. And I would much rather understand that at a prototype level than to build a giant system out before realizing I didn't build a dog detector, I built a snow detector. Once you have those decisions made, once you have explanations for complex models, then let's actually build it together, right? Does my design meet my requirements? Are my principles still intact? Am I testing robustly to ensure that security is there, that encryption is there, that all the different privacy techniques I can use actually work really well together? Now, we could do an entire course on stuff like homomorphic encryption. I'm not going to right now. If you want to learn about parametric stuff like that, come talk to me. But foundationally, now that we're building the thing, are we still adhering to the principles of what we talked about? Once the system's up and running, it's important to not presume this as being a one-off system, right? AI models in the world, machine learning models in the world are living, breathing things, metaphorically. And it's important to continue on with what we're talking about, how these pieces fit together, right? Model drift is a common problem in AI models. Very simply said, if I build a model to predict unemployment in Canada today, I can certainly guarantee that 30 years from now, it's not going to do a good job of predicting unemployment. Things change, parameters change, life changes. The data that I use to build a machine learning model, totally different than it was before. It's important. That difference, that error over time, or over anything, is called drift, right? A month from now, a year from now, my unemployment model might not be as good. And to track that drift, you see that chart on the left, how the error gets higher and higher, teaches me and reaffirms to me that I need to retrain my model again and again and again. I received new data, let's train it again to be correct, and let's put it outside to the world. That kind of continual training, part of ML ops, part of the entire process. And it's important to recognize, and the point for this slide is that what we're saying is that it's not a one-off event. Data governance is not a one-off event. Architecture is not a one-off event. This is a living, breathing system, again, metaphorically. Skynet's not coming, don't worry about that. It's a living, breathing system that needs to be curated and cared for. And when you put those data ethics into practice, all these pieces fit together. Right? When data ethics is a key part of your governance structure, of your decisions for architecture, and all those things working together, that's super important and that's super powerful. But if you take anything out of our presentation today, if you envision the future, really what you're going to be seeing is a model of a world that says, let's take a step back, let's inventory everything we have, where we want to go, and here's all the roadmap pieces to get there in time. I'd like to thank everyone for their joining today. We actually ended 6 minutes early, which is fabulous. I'll call that a win. Mary Ann, I'll pass the buck back to you, but certainly everyone, thank you for putting up with my talking for the last 2 hours and change or so. If you want to learn any more, please, we're happy to do discovery workshops and say, this is where you are right now, this is where you need to be in 5 years. And it's my job to sit down and learn about cool things that people are doing moving forward. Thank you so much. Appreciate your time today.
Yeah, thank you so much, Jim. And thank you everyone who was able to join us today. And as Jim mentioned, there's numerous ways to engage with us further. So connect with us on LinkedIn, or we'll have some communications coming out following up to this presentation. We'll have the recording and some other ways to reach out and connect. Thank you so much, everyone. Have a great morning.